I'm Rachel, I'm product manager at Codurance. I've been here for about 18 months now. This was the first consultancy role that I've had, and it's been quite interesting to see how you can go and do product in kind of a short space of time or a longer period of time with different companies, as opposed to being internal and having the battle some of you guys probably have of trying to drive change. And then with me, we've got Sarah. I'll just pass along.
Thanks. Hi, everybody. My name's Sarah Timms. I've been in the world of product now for nearly 15 years. And for the last 5 or 6 years or so, I've only done either interim or coaching roles. So I go into companies and usually help them do some form of transformation to the product operating model. Or I coach people one-to-one, anything from entry-level product managers to CPOs. And I do a lot of fractional work, which is also kind of like one of the buzzwords of today, as we're going to talk about that. So nice to meet you.
Cool. Hi, folks. I'm David Heath, Head of Profession for Software Engineering at the Government Digital Service. So my role is to do with looking after our software engineering staff, their professional development, career paths, etc., and also recruitment, all that kind of stuff. I've been at GDS since the early days in 2011. So I joined as a developer. I was a hands-on developer on gov.uk, and I also worked on the payments platform at GDS. So I've sort of seen the evolution and growth of GDS. So that's a bit about me. Over to you, Mash.
Thank you. Hello, I'm Mash Biller. I'm one of the co-founders of Codurance, and my other roles are MD for Codurance as well, and I look after the product service lines. I've been in the software industry for about 25 years, all the way from development to product management and everything in between. That's me.
Brilliant. Thanks. So Sarah kind of alluded to it then. We've been joking while we've been planning that we feel like over the past couple of months, discovery has become a bit of a buzzword. Like, it's something we talk about a lot in consultancy when we're going in and being a period of time to help figure out what you want and why. But we've seen a lot more events going on, being like how to do discoveries, what to do about discovery. And I thought, just to get us started, it'd be good if we say what we mean by discovery to kind of set the tone for this evening. And hopefully it's not becoming a buzzword, because I think it's useful. So you want to go first?
Yep.
Yeah.
So I'm glad it's becoming a buzzword, because it means companies are starting to get serious about it. Because for me, it's table stakes. And discovery for me is the process or the activity of using hundreds of different techniques to discover customer problems or user problems that are worth solving, that meet the strategic goals or aims of the business, and then discovering the best way to solve those valuable problems, again, that work for the business. So that's how I define discovery.
Cool, thanks, Sarah. I don't know if I've got much to add, really. I think it's, I think it's an intentional period of, and usually time boxed as well. I think that's important that you set out a sort of 6, 12 weeks or whatever it is, but because you can go on forever discovering things, right? So, but yeah, looking at the problem domain and the solution domain, and trying to build up that picture. Yeah.
Thank you. I'll say the same thing, but in different words again. But for me, discovery is actually problem finding, so understanding opportunities and validating them as quick as you can at different kind of levels of fidelity as you move forward in that validation process.
Brilliant. So when I've done discoveries both in internal roles or now as a consultant, I've found that having the right people around that table or putting the information in can really make or break them. Like, the last thing you want to do is spend that period of time and then someone be like, oh, you can't do that because legal won't let you. So just wondering, kind of, Mash, if we were to look at the types of experience and knowledge that you'd expect or be looking for when you're doing discovery, what sort of kind of people or information would you want to get started with?
It's a very, very interesting question, actually, because the way I see product discovery is it is a whole team activity. You you do need all the perspectives. You don't need necessarily everyone and like really large engineering teams that often they will make the solutions much more complicated and start over engineering things and so on and move more towards the kind of scale aspect. But you do need all the different roles. So for me, the roles are all the way from actually the sensing and the problem finding aspect, and whether that is user research or market research, and understanding the goal, the strategy of the business, all that side of things, moving into kind of solution design, whether that is kind of user experience, involving user research as well, and all those kind of things. Content design as well plays an important aspect into it, and then the kind of creating, as you move into validation and more higher fidelity validation, you have to start thinking about creating solutions that you can put in front of your wherever you are trying to get the feedback, and that ultimately starts moving towards software. And the early part of that is kind of the skills around prototyping and different levels of prototyping, all the way to what people term MVPs, that actually are also there to validate a particular kind of opportunity in the market. So you need the full spectrum, in my view. But earlier on in the problem sensing and definition, you'd need more of the kind of people who are trying to sense the market and so on. And further towards validation, you need the solution, the engineering aspect as well.
So kind of like a varying people throughout that phase, like get the information up front and then make tweaks throughout so that you're getting the right input and that people understand enough of the information early enough on.
Yeah, and it's important that these people are involved as early as possible, because often, like one of the things I find that we get often wrong in discovery is that when it becomes a domain of just one or two people who are kind of doing some kind of feasibility study or trying to understand the market and trying to kind of do their own guerrilla research and so on, but not involving the team because the rest of the team is too busy or they're too expensive to help with this, and I think that's where we often go wrong. Yeah.
Sarah, David, what have you guys approached with those, or any other people?
Before I answer, can I ask how many people in the room are engineers? Okay. How many people are in product? Okay. So the only answer I give really, it's nuanced, but the usual person who is not at the table is engineering. To me, that is the biggest mistake squads, anyone involved in discovery makes. And I go into so many companies and it's the first thing I look for is engineering involved in discovery and design, product design involved in discovery. And it blows my mind that there are these really highly skilled individuals that cost an awful lot of money and understand the emerging enabling technologies better than anybody else at the table. And they are usually not at the table for product discovery. So product managers in the room, if you do one thing, make sure you go with your tech lead or someone from your squad who is an engineer and involve them as much as you can in product discovery, because they're usually the ones who will end up solving the problem. And they hear the problems and they can usually find really rapid ways of solving them. And then the product designer, who is the expert in designing experiences that are usable for users and that delight them. So just kind of like, if that was going to be the one thing that you did, get those two people involved in your discovery, because they will make your product amazing and you'll hit your KPIs.
I totally agree with that. And in fact, I think the other way around as well, if as engineering you feel that you're not involved in that, you shouldn't just sit back, because often this is also what happens on the engineering side, is that people are often happy in that safety of like next feature and will do and give me the next feature and I don't care about the product and so on. And you'll find that there is so much reward and satisfaction to be had in actually trying to understand the whole. And it makes your problem much more interesting, but also allows you come up with much more novel solutions to the problem as well. And it gives a purpose to what you're doing, so you can understand the impact of it. It's not just the code that is now in production, but it's also the impact that it's having in people's life and the value that it's adding to the businesses.
Yeah, and one of the things Sarah and I were talking about just before we came in is the importance of situational awareness in how you're approaching discovery, sort of understanding what the unknowns are that you're trying to discover. And I think we both really like Marty Kagan's 4 risks model for thinking about that. And I'm going to try and remember them, but Sarah, help me if it's there's sort of the value proposition risk, the business viability risk, which is like, is it acceptable from the legal and compliance point of view, as well as does it fit in with your sort of business model and so on, the feasibility risk and usability risk, right? And so all of those aspects need to be sort of covered, and depending on the market that you're operating in and your business strategy, one or other of those risks may be much more critical than the other. So that, I find that a useful framework.
That's a really nice way actually of deciding who you need at the table, is understanding, whenever I work with companies or product teams, if they're approaching something, some opportunity they want to go after, to map out the risk of the Venn diagram. Like if you are wrong on those 4 quadrants, the impact is going to be significant, and then it helps you focus your discovery and know who you need to pull into your discovery. So if it's desirability, is this a problem for people? Are they looking for a solution? And is ours better than the competition? I might be pulling in the user researchers or the market research people who can help address that risk. If it's just tech feasibility, then again, it's all your engineering functions, so that can help steer who you need at the table for your discovery.
It's a very interesting. It reminds me of a conversation I recently had, which is quite a mature organization, and the product is very mature and it's already in the market and doing well, and they're just building the next set of features and so on. But again, there is a big silo between kind of tech and design and product, and they were all kind of trying to understand, well, we're building the next thing, but we don't really know what we are building. And then product is saying, well, we're kind of trying to discover, but sometimes we give them this next feature because we think that, oh, we want to understand what this is doing and so on. But but we can't really tell you what the value is because we're still trying to discover. So we don't know if this is more valuable than this and so on. And the developers are saying, well, we don't understand why they want to do that versus this and that. And we say, well, what are the different ways that you are actually. One thing is trying to understand value of the next feature, like what's it going to give me if this goes to the market. Are you looking at things like, for example, other risk factors, like things like cost of delay as well? Like if this one is not in the market next, it may be of less value, or you may think it's less value, but what is the cost of delay? Because actually with research as well, people found that it's all a guessing game, but cost of delay is an easier guess to make than the value guesses. So you start actually using these kind of techniques and moving further in and kind of expanding your kind of, I guess, scope or field of view. You start understanding what is the next thing that we should be doing. So you start having that voice with the product owner, product managers, and so on, to say, well, you know, if this thing is coming next, what are the different kind of heuristics you're using? How are you managing risk that this investment may prove right or not, and these kind of things. And when you start asking these kind of questions, you actually start not only making your understanding better, but you start understanding the reasons behind why you're doing certain things. And then you start moving away from a lot of the times the kind of things that often that are indicators of performance or value, like the number of features or story points and all those kind of things. And you start getting more agency and moving towards different types of conversations where you're really trying to understand value.
I think so identifying people is really important. I think coming at it from a risk point of view, I'm going to go and have a look at how I bring that in actually, because I think I start with who knows what I need to know, and bring them in. So that's quite interesting. And when we talk about like the 3 areas, like there's a diagram we use a lot internally that I think most people have seen as 3 overlapping circles. That's that product, design and engineering, because like you said, if you don't have them in, you're probably being a busy fool as well as missing out on information. Like, I know I've definitely sat in product roles being like, I can't look at that because I'm just far too busy. But actually, I'm probably just not delegating. Like, where is your design person to bring that input? Where's your tech person to take that away and find out? Like, you don't need to know all the answers, and other people can go and find them. So I think if we think about those 3 circles, we know who we want at the table. How do we merge them together? Quite often they are 3 strong personalities with different angles and views that they want to bring to this discovery. And ultimately, you've got a defined period of time, a set goal that you want to meet. How do we bring those 3 areas together? I don't know who wants to start that one. Do you want to go, Sarah?
Sure.
Yeah.
I think it's really easy to bring them together, actually, in theory. In practice, less so. But if you have a very clear product vision, so any of you that are product leaders in the room or in the leadership positions, if you have a clear product vision, a clear product strategy, so you know what 2 to 3 things you're trying to achieve this period, this year, and you have assigned those things that you want to achieve to squads with a very clear mission and a very clear goal, KPI, OKR, whatever framework you use, there's very little room for what I see happening is the teams pull together because they are all working towards that single goal, increase conversion rate by X. And so then you start working as a partnership. And I think you are a partnership, actually. And even if you bring people in from the business, you're a unit for a period of time, as long as possible, hopefully, to do what needs to be done to meet that KPI. And usually it's the product manager responsible for meeting the KPI, and the smart ones are the ones that pull in the people that can actually solutionize to meet that KPI. So I think if you have those elements in place, you don't see conflict. You see people coming together to collaborate and kind of hit that KPI.
Yeah, I would completely agree. You know, it's like the basics of getting a team right, and it is a team, right? And if they're all clear on the goal, they understand what they're trying to achieve, and they're all aligned to achieve that, and they don't have their own kind of sub goals that are actually conflicting, and that the team is being its success is criteria is that goal and not the individuals and what they're doing. Then they will align because they don't have any other purpose that they can kind of move and veer away from that thing, and they will start making certain compromises. But the other aspect of this is the ability to interact, because we don't exercise this muscle that often. We don't even have the common vocabulary to actually speak the product, especially tech with design and product. And the more you do it, it's like how do you actually understand and are aware of each other's disciplines? Because that awareness creates that common vocabulary that you can then start discussing, and you can start addressing each other's fears and concerns together, I think.
Yeah, I think it's basic building relationships and a team, and I guess taking the time to do that, which sometimes we feel like when we're under pressure that's a luxury, but I think that's a mistake to skip it, right?
Yeah. I have a tip.
I love a tip.
It might be a bit controversial. I see teams that are really, really, really busy, they never fight. Teams that are not very busy fight. What's that phrase? Devil makes light work of idle hands.
Yeah.
So the teams that are kind of, usually they're feature teams. Someone from outside has said, just build this feature. So they're usually probably a bit bored. They're the ones, when I start working with a company, can we map out the roles and responsibilities? And I'm like, oh, I hate that, because you draw a line in the sand of who's meant to be doing what, and it doesn't create a very healthy dynamic. When teams are flat out, you've got to meet this KPI, you've got to do it by Q3, like nobody has time to be fighting. I'm meant to do that. And again, they just come together, and you, as you said, like we have a deep respect for each other's specialisms and draw on each other, but you kind of just muddle in and pick up the slack, and everybody picks up the slack and spots the gaps and fills the hole, and but draws on their kind of area of expertise. And those teams don't fight. So again, if you're in leadership positions, maybe give your teams more tighter deadlines to meet a KPI.
Give them more work.
Yeah, get them working.
So I guess the key thing there I'm taking out of that is that if you can get everyone on board with your vision and strategy, and then tying it back to bringing the right people in early, everyone knows what we're trying to achieve, they know what we're trying to measure, and they've got that clear end goal, so they haven't got time to bicker amongst themselves. So if we are starting discovery and you've got that whole team alignment, as you then move further on in discovery and then into delivery, have you guys got any tips for how do you keep that focus? Because it's all well and good at the beginning when we're excited, but when you're kind of heads down, kind of on with all those tasks, that's when I've sometimes seen it being like, oh, this would be a good idea, and I've just done this, and while I was doing that design, I've just done this bit as well. So you end up then kind of growing that scope. Like how would you give people tips on how do you keep that focus? I don't know who wants to go first. Sorry, Sarah's next to me. So
David,
I guess. I mean, but I guess that's also when things are getting exciting, if you're starting to get users, right? And so, you know, and my experience has been that, and at GDS we generally teams build and operate the systems. There's not a sort of separate operations team. So we very much, and teams are on call as well. So when services are live, we're really on the hook for the reliability of the services as well. But teams also, we have support rotas, and so our engineers are regularly get interactions with end users and helping resolve problems. So I think that does that motivates people. I think it brings having the chance to sort of interact with people firsthand who are using your service is great. I feel like I'm not quite answering the question.
That doesn't matter. No, it's still valid though. Kind of making
valid.
room for people to have that space. Yeah.
But I think the way I would tackle it, of course, that's perfectly valid, but also a kind of visibility of somehow tying your efforts to the impact that you're having. So this is all about the different metrics at the different levels, right? All the way from economic metrics, like even looking at the life cycle profit, which is basically the full length of the product, and how can you understand everything that you're doing? Is it extending its life cycle and the revenue and the cost of that product? But kind of moving further down towards user adoption for a particular feature, what impact that next thing had on so trying to understand, so every release, every bit of work that you've done, what was its impact? So trying to tie these things up, that then gives you focus, because then as you start doing things that are not moving one of those needles that you deem important, you stop doing them because you are being kind of, or your progress or your success, you yourself are monitoring from that perspective, and that gives you focus. But if you don't, and often I see in companies is that there is not a lot of visibility on the work. There's just one feature after the next feature and so on, and there's a lot of kind of just guesswork. This will work, and this is doing a great job, and so on. And if that happens, then of course there'll be guesswork at the bottom as well. Like people will be doing whatever because they think, I guess this will work, and that doesn't create the focus. So in my view, having all these metrics all the way from the kind of the productivity and the developer experience related metrics to the product metrics, to the economic metrics, or the economic variables, and if they are connected and visible, and they are being shown release by release, how they are moving, then that helps create the focus, I think.
I think that's a really good point, is to stop scope creep. If you find yourself wanting to squeeze in a little, this button will be really nice, we'll do something good, force yourself or your team to understand that little button you're going to add, it's got to be solving a problem, and you need to know what problem it's going to be solving, and then if you deliver it, has it in fact solved the problem, and what was the KPI what needle moved because you did that. I kind of have this mantra that I drum into any product manager I coach, which is product managers should get really vocal and upset and be ringing the bell if you withhold value from customers. So that talks a little bit to kind of incremental delivery and continuous delivery, but if you make one tiny change, you should be fighting to release that because it makes your users' lives a tiny, tiny bit better. And thousands of those tiny improvements are what makes your product untouchable. And so really try and think in those terms. Yes, it would be nice to have this button and this button, but let's release this button because it does something for the user. It makes their life better. And then if we still want to add the other button, we can do that next. But you better know by doing that second thing, it should be moving some kind of needle. And if it isn't, then there are plenty other problems waiting to be solved. So.
Yeah, it's also a really good engineering discipline to break things down into smaller pieces so that they can flow faster, lower risk. Each change is smaller, so it's lower risk. So, yeah. So.
Just checking with Austin, have you got anything? Okay.
Yeah, the most common question is, how do you know if discovery is complete and has been successful?
Okay, probably let's split those into two, because I think for me they're two separate things. So if we want to look at first, like, discovery is complete, and I guess that actually, my next question is going to be that we spoke at the beginning about discovery is a bit of a buzzword, but for all of us, it's not a one-time thing. So I guess I'll jump in with the answer of discovery is never complete. It's a phase of discovery. So what are you trying to achieve at that point versus continuous discovery? Because no one releases a product or an update and never touches it again. You're going to have to do something to know what your next phase is. So you guys can probably put it in more eloquent words, but I'm like, it's never complete. It's just that bit's done.
Eloquent words.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I would completely echo discovery. It depends on what the frame of that question was, because if you say discovery as an activity, kind of general activity within software development or product development, yes, it's definitely never complete. And successful is also a very interesting question, actually, because so one thing is you're always going through these cycles of discovery. Sometimes that discovery leads into engineering and scale and so on. Other time, and this is the other thing, is that it's an experiment that you've validated and to the point where you think, okay, this is a dead end, and you move on to the next opportunity, the next thing, and so on. Other things, you are constantly discovering how to then enhance and evolve it so that you kind of gaining on that particular feature. And the success element, and I know you try to kind of, but I think they're actually very relevant, because the success element, if you think of discovery is successful if you've spent a bunch of effort, and if it failed, but you failed as fast as you could, it's still very successful. In fact, the only time when I would say discovery is not successful is when you kept going on and kind of basically beating a dead horse for a very long time because of the way things have been organized. And that's when discovery is not successful, I think.
There's a really cool stat. So Harvard Business Review did some research, and you basically 80% of the time you're wrong in your hypothesis. So there you go, 20% of the time your discovery might be successful if you're lucky and you do it really rigorously. And Pendo, which is kind of like a Google Analytics similar type tooling, they just also recently released some research that showed that 80% of features on a product are just not used by users. And so basically getting used to the fact that you're likely to be wrong in all circumstances is a really good thing to know. So there's kind of a tangible success rate.
It's probably quite easy though for us to sit here actually and say discovery is never complete. If you're trying to implement this in the workplace and you're trying to get people on board with it, I don't think I could come in and be like, Mash, I just want to do discovery and it's never going to be complete. So I think in that terms, it's probably that definition, like what are you trying to discover? So are you launching a new feature? Are you trying to catch up with a competitor? Like what's the purpose of that discovery? And I think if you have that, it's going to be what activities do you need to do to answer that well enough. And you might actually change what you're doing halfway through because of that information. And I think you're never going to be complete. And some of it is going to be a gut feeling of, okay, we've got enough of a spread of research to back up that this feature should solve that problem. Let's get it out. If we think there's some value to customers, how do we get it out as quick as possible? How do we learn? And then feed that back through. Because if you spend too long up front trying to find all these wonderful solutions, well, actually, the market's changed and all your research you did 3 months ago is out of date, so you've wasted your time.
Yeah. You know, that feedback is such an important word, because that's what it's all about, actually. It's about, you know, when you've got a hypothesis, you need to kind of validate it, and that is through feedback. And whichever way, hundreds of ways that you're trying to get that feedback. And it's about, and feedback is useless if you don't act on it. And sometimes feedback is telling you is to stop, you know, as you say, that you're wrong. And apparently 80% of the time it will tell you that you're wrong. You just have to get to the point as quickly as you can so you can move to something else, and not just spending more and more time at something that is already kind of saying that it's not useful. Yeah.
I would, you should understand that it's continuous discovery, not discovery. And again, I kind of cringe when people start working with companies and they're like, oh, we're in the discovery phase. When's that going to be complete? But actually, I don't ever bother fighting that battle. It's hard just to get people to let you do discovery. Most recently, I had a CEO on a call, you know, when are we going to stop dithering? So that's the kind of attitude you're going to be faced with around discovery. So in a way, don't bother, if you're trying to implement this, I wouldn't bother trying to, and it's going to go on forever, because you'll just, again, they'll shut you down. Just start it, claim, yes, the discovery phase will be over in 3 months, 1 month, whatever it is. And then as they start to see the fruits of your labor, then you can start to have the conversation of, well, we will never stop discovering. And again, don't you think it's kind of stupid that you would ever stop discovering? How are you going to keep iterating and evolving? So
you can segment it quite nicely, can't you? That you've done some research, you've got clarity on kind of problems or goals that you've got. You've then got a proof of concept out or something in the hands of users or a beta group. Okay, well, we've done discovery. Now we're getting some user feedback. Oh, and now we're going to act on that feedback and come back. That's all discovery. You've got some feedback. You've taken some more research into the beginning bit. But in terms of positioning that, you can kind of market it however you want internally. Like if you've got something out and you've learned something, then that's the next phase. I think it's only since coming to a consultancy where I've looked at it as the whole view that I've been like, oh, I've just always done this, but we've just called it 6 different things at different points.
Yeah. In fact, someone recently said to me that, well, discovery is kind of just for B2C. Like, we are a B2B company, you know, we deal with we don't have consumers who can just throw features at and see if it works or not. They you know, they will be very upset if something, and he said, like, you know, you think about the activities of exploration and all these things, you are going to get things wrong, and you are throwing features, whether you like it or not, you are throwing features at people anyway. So it's about engaging with people early and getting even your B2B customers, engaging with them early and helping them understand what you're trying to build and trying to understand them. That's all discovery. It's not just like throwing something at them and then, you know, like, oh, we'll see how they behave. It's about interactions. And that's what, so often, like, sometimes we put like big words around things, but sometimes you can just, as you say, you use a language that is more accessible and call it whatever that, you know, and even don't even have to say those things. You just have to do those, so the activities that are within the discovery, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, well, there are quite a few questions coming in. One of them probably ties back into the start of the conversation, which is around timeboxing. And specifically, how do you define the scope, those boundaries, and more importantly, maybe, how do you ensure that you stick to them?
Timeboxing. So I can try to answer that. So one of the things, for example, in Agile, we always had spikes, which you would say that, you know, you timebox because so timebox is more related to kind of an investigation or a research into something, right? And we'd say like time box it because we want to understand it a bit better, but you can understand it, you can keep trying to understand it for as long as you can. In the context of a discovery, I think it's about validation, and time boxing is kind of not even, I wouldn't say that relevant. It's because what you're trying to do is you're trying to validate something as quick as possible. And if you time box something, you might not get to the validation, and then you wasted all that time. So I would say, for a discovery, at least for that context, that's just my view, is time boxing is the wrong way to look at it. It's more look at it from the point of view of, okay, I need to validate this particular hypothesis or this particular thing so that we can move it forward. What is the quickest way that I can validate it, right? And how long that would take, you can, or at least the first iteration of that, and kind of being more iterative on that and trying to learn from that feedback. I would say look at it from that way rather than, okay, I'm going to do this, but at some point someone's going to just draw the curtain and I can't do that anymore, basically.
I guess at the start, when you're detailing what tasks you want to do in a discovery, some of them will be really clear that you can personally time box. So if you're going to put together the user personas or collate the problems, if it's stuff that you already know, they're just activities that you need to be strict with yourself and time box. But then if there's things where it's like, I want to put this out and get some feedback from people, those things are a little bit more difficult to time box because you don't know how quickly they're going to pick it up and use it. So I think you can time box some of the activities where you know how to do them already. If it's a case of, we're going to go and review this information that we had 3 months ago because it's probably out of date, you'll know how long that takes because you did it already. Whereas if it's, we want to put this out and see how quickly we'll get feedback, you can probably estimate things. Like when I've worked in e-commerce, we're trying to always, how do you make that checkout quicker? We know that if you make a change on that checkout, you're going to have feedback in 24 hours. You're going to know if it's worked or not. So what industry are you in? What change are you putting out? Like, then you'll know how quickly that loop comes back in terms of that time boxing.
Yeah. I've got some thoughts, but you
Yeah.
mentioned time
Yeah,
boxing, so
yeah.
you should go
I guess,
first.
I think I was thinking about in sort of new product areas, and maybe in the public sector, there's often propositions for ideas that need to be explored, and I think you can end up spending a long time on things, perhaps. So I think a time box can help there to put a boundary on. Okay, we're going to stop at this point. So that's really where I think time boxing can be useful.
My question is that it's like often if you have people kind of fill the space that they have, right? So if the premise is that you want to kind of like say explore an idea as quickly as possible, would you think that time boxing would in some ways may actually be not an optimal thing to do, because they'll say, okay, I have that long, now I can take that long, rather than I need to be as quick as possible to validate that idea?
I think it depends on how the organization approaches decision making. Yeah.
I guess I would say, actually Marty Kagan would say your discovery should be an order of magnitude less than it will take you to build the thing. So if it's going to take you 10 weeks to build the thing, then maybe you should be spending 10 days to discover the thing. But the slower you go, the more likely someone senior is going to intervene and just tell you what to build, which you don't want. So I see teams like get scrappy, get your team together and get creative. Everyone thinks of discovery as, one-to-one interviews, prototype testing. There are literally hundreds of different scrappy, cheap things that you can do to validate. Just understand your assumption that you're trying to test and get together with your team and get creative. There's the book, how to, 100 ways to test business ideas. There's blogs online with loads and loads of different techniques. Even I'm constantly learning new techniques, and I coach discovery. And so just find it fast. Think like a startup. Think like cheap, fast, what will validate this assumption for us quickly, and if we don't move quickly, some annoying hippo is going to come in and instead just tell us what to build, which you want to avoid.
Nice. I like that. Think like a startup, because yeah, if anyone's worked in startups, that is very much it, isn't it? Just eyes on it, get done.
Yeah, and startups come up with like, I mean, I've worked with founders and like we're running LinkedIn ads on stealth just to see how many people are clicking on this just to validate desirability. And we couldn't time box it because actually we needed to let it run until we felt like we had met the parameters of the test. Do that too, because otherwise you'll let yourself say, oh yeah, no, that's good enough. So set that, we need 50 people to click on this and click through and sign up for an email for us to validate there is desirability in the market for this fake solution that we hadn't built yet. So spend time with founders because they're creative. They'll give you ideas.
Hey, coming back to you now.
We've got quite a few questions, but
I think the next bit I was going to cover off is kind of looking more of that dual track, so discovery going into delivery. It's up to you guys whether you want to move on to that or if you want to carry on doing audience questions. Any preference?
We can start with that.
Let's do this and then we'll
we can
come
do
back to you in a
more of
minute then.
that,
Okay.
yeah.
So it's that next bit where we were talking then about discovery is never complete. You should really be continually looking at what you're doing, what you're going to do next. How do you keep moving those dials? And that can be quite hard to implement. And I think especially as someone in a product role, you need to be able to be in the detail of the day-to-day, keeping the teams running, kind of setting that vision, but then also be able to step out to be like, what's going on in the market? What else do I need to do? So I don't know, anyone want to take that one first of like tips on how do you move into that dual track model? You want to, Sarah?
Yep.
Yep.
I think it's definitely, the load is really heavy on the product managers. Because as you say, you've got to do all your go-to-market planning and you're making sure the team has everything they need to deliver, and then you're kind of horizon scanning. And but if you again go back to that, be fast, be scrappy, don't try and discover the world, just what you need to. You're doing it in little increments, and so then actually to fit it into your day-to-day with your tech lead ideally and your product designer, if 20% of your day or some small portion of your day is devoted to continuous discovery, usually actually you can get into a fairly easy rhythm. It's when you're doing these massive discoveries, because we're in the discovery phase now, delivery still happening over here. You've left it to build up too much. So if you're doing it continuously, it just becomes part of your day. Once a week, talk to a customer. Once a week, run an A/B test, do something in preparation for what you know is coming down the track, but then you can keep delivering usually.
Yeah, I think the cadence is an important part, isn't it? Because, I mean, I think for people who don't know the concept of dual track, which is basically within the same team, you have the discovery track, which is kind of problem finding, validating, and that moving into scale or engineering, or sometimes they call it delivery as well. So how does that discovery element keep happening, the experimentation, testing of hypotheses, opportunities, and so on, and then it moves into scale or engineering. And as you say, like if it's continuous, it's less of a problem. Cadence is also very important because there's always results of that need to keep feeding into the rest of the team. So they need to have awareness of what's happening up there, even if it ends up not filtering into the kind of more scale or the engineering side of things. It's always a very difficult thing that you can't. It's not a perfect system. You can't have everyone busy all the time. And I think this whole idea of keeping everyone busy all the time is quite a bad idea, because actually it creates kind of quite a lot of waste. People end up doing stuff that is just not useful, or they're kind of fighting over and gold plating stuff, and all this kind of things start happening. So even if people I wouldn't worry too much about like, okay, the rest of the engineering team doesn't have enough to do, or that kind of stuff, because you need to validate ideas as fast as you can, and you need to start keep feeding that into the team. But the other thing is around flexing of the team. The teams should not be that large, because often when there is a large team, what happens is that you kind of start going down that route where, you always need to find something to do because there's lots of mouths to feed type thing. So keeping teams fairly kind of lean as well, I think helps in that area.
You very much live in this model, don't you, David? You were saying that your teams are looking at what's next, managing the day-to-day and on call. So how do you find that?
Yeah, it's not easy, right? There's no, and like you say, it puts a lot of responsibility on the product manager to be sort of, I guess, keeping track of the complexity of both what we've prioritized and also what are all the unknowns, the hypotheses, who are we talking to, etc. Some of the things that GDS does, or on the pay team, for example, we had a regular open demo session for people interested in adopting pay, and that was a really fruitful way of, we had once a week a discussion with a new team who had been reading our docs and thinking about using it, and that often brought in really good ideas. I think the challenge on a busy, complex product like the payments platform that I worked on was really that there was always too many ideas and too much to do. So and I think we had periods where we had the flexibility within our teams to set a sub team to sort of spend a quarter doing discovery on some ideas, or validating a particular idea, and if that sort of worked out, then we'd sort of make that the roadmap or whatever for the next period. So I think some of that flexing is important as well. Yeah.
Actually, another tip as well, the more you've involved your engineers and your product designers in the discovery phase, the less of your time as a product manager, I can't remember if you said they were product managers, your squad will need. And I always, hands up if you write user stories as part of, yeah, okay. So I always, again, another marker for me on how healthy the discovery practices are of a company, I'll look at the user stories, who's writing them. And if it's only the product manager, and if they're this long list of requirements, then what that tells me is you've had someone who understands the problem to solve, and then trying to communicate that to the rest of the squad in as much granular detail as possible. Whereas if that squad were just involved in the discovery with you, hearing the problems, they don't need that lengthy list of requirements and long user stories, because they already know, because they were right there with you designing the solution. And so off they go and build it, and then just a smaller subset of the squad can then go away and kind of do the high level discovery, and then again start bringing the team into that. So again, when you get to then the next thing, they already know, and your user stories are just that kind of, I can't remember whose quote, it's like an invitation to a conversation and nothing more. So think to yourself, how long are my user stories? How much am I having to communicate in them to the engineers?
That's one of the first things that I've started doing with all the teams I work with for the past couple of years, because I've been there feeling like you have to write War and Peace, and I worked with offshore developers. The time difference was completely different. There was big language barriers. Again, it was working in e-com, and I was trying to explain the concept of a gift checkout to buy a gift voucher, and you could send it to them or you could send it to yourself. Really simple to us, but the user stories then were just horrendous. And I think been burned so many times that I hate writing them. That now it's like,
product managers, I think, do hate writing them. They're not very good at writing them.
Now you get 2 lines, this is the real word thing that we're trying to solve from the title, and you'll get some bullet points that I want you to deliver. You guys go and figure it out. I don't care after that. As long as those 2 lines at the top are met, do whatever you want.
Yeah, kind of really writing all those user stories. It's time you never get back, because it has no real value.
And no one reads it. You'll have 20 bullet points.
So quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah, they still come and ask you the questions anyway, even if
you're still going to test it and send it back through. What's the point? Yeah, I think that one is a really good tip for anyone that is still stuck writing really elaborate user stories. Have a really open conversation with your team and just say, this takes me a really long time. It takes a lot of energy. And every time I get a message and I get distracted, it takes me even longer. Like, can we trial it for a sprint whereby I'm going to put them in this and we're going to put the bullet points in? We'll make sure that on refinement you all understand it. On stand-up, if you've got questions, ask me. When we check in throughout the day, just ask me and just see if you can phase them into it, because the pressure of trying to have user stories ready that you said before, Mash, like making sure that engineers are busy. If you're writing long user stories, you're probably thinking, I've got to get these written because I've got to keep people busy because it's really expensive. If you empower the team that you've got a title that they probably understand because they were in there at the beginning, a couple of plain English, this is what we're trying to achieve, anyone can pick that up and put the bullet points in. It would make a massive difference.
Yeah, you know, like recently, in fact, I was speaking to someone today about, when you actually define something at that level of fidelity, you put so much detail in there that sometimes it's not even relevant, and you are kind of making a punt. And we were looking at a particular graph that needs to be designed in a particular way, and the developers were trying to exactly do it in that particular way. And they said, well, it would have been actually much simpler and would have solved the problem better if they really understood what was the intent behind it. And so they could have actually made the problem simpler. Now, the reason they didn't make it simpler is because they were given it in such high fidelity, and they took it as gospel that this is what they have to do. And so they didn't go back and they're looking at the solution to then reanalyze the problem. So the more you define the problem, you're actually adding a lot of your own solution and your own kind of guesswork in there. But then that has this impact of saying to the people reading it that you knew exactly what you wanted and exactly what you're doing, which isn't the case. And they end up wasting a lot of time when it might not be the right thing to do as well.
I've seen quite a lot of that when it comes particularly to front-end designers. So having your designer in those conversations throughout and available makes such difference. Like, people spending days trying to get pagination working right on the pages because on the designs, that's how it was. And we're like, it didn't really matter as long as we didn't load the full screen at once. That's all we wanted. So kind of, yeah, focusing too much on detail that actually doesn't matter what you're trying to achieve definitely helps.
I'm seeing more and more really good tooling. I mean, design systems, and then what is it? Full story.
Yeah.
Full story.
Yeah. Like the newer version of Hotjar.
No.
So
I can't remember.
We had that implemented.
It's just the tooling that allows the front end devs. It's like the equivalent of using Figma for your design system, but then it's the front end. I can't remember the name of it, but the more your front end devs and your product designers are collaborating again, and that's why you kind of that both at the table. Your front end devs will be advising your designers, don't make us do it like that because that's going to take forever. Let's do it like this because it's faster and it achieves the same outcome.
Yeah. Definitely.
I'm going to try and remember the name of that.
It's going to bug you, isn't it?
Yeah, no, I think the user story, Connextra user story format has sort of stuck as this is how you do user stories, but it, as you say, a couple of bullet points or a well-written title, but really it's the promise of the conversation.
People get fixated, don't they, on their as a, when I, and it doesn't even read properly. It doesn't even make sense because you tried to put it in that format. Just put it in a bullet point. Yeah. I can bounce back to you because I feel like you've got a list.
Yeah, I do. I've got a list. Yeah. So I think something that probably connects quite a few of the things we're talking about is how to ensure discoveries happen correctly when working with third-party suppliers. So whether it's an organisation disconnect perhaps.
Yeah. So I guess, do you want to go, Mash, or do you want?
we-
As I said, that's what we do.
End up being the third-party supplier,
Yeah.
so I think it's a good question.
Is the question from the point of view of the client or from the point of view of the supplier?
Yeah, it's a good
Yeah.
point.
Yeah.
Is it a planted question or something? But so one of the things, the way I look at it, I mean, again, I'm going to answer it from the point of view of supplier because we often end up in that situation where we are the team that are building the features, and then everything is kind of already already done for us. And I think the organization does itself a great deal of injustice, because we are not, a development team is not cheap, right? And then hiring a software development team and then dealing with them as suppliers, as someone to keep aside, is actually, you kind of taking something quite expensive and then you're stripping it of value, right? So you have to bring the supplier into your organization, and you have to create the team as a whole. You have to kind of try to remove those silos as much as you can, right? So the discovery, so in order to answer that question, then it's exactly the same. From someone else coming into that team, let's say that, in the old days, the team were co-located, and someone walking in should not know who the supplier is and who the client is. It should be a team that is building a product together, right? And that's the vision that you should have. I know there are many constraints in the middle that cannot make it happen, but as long as you have that vision and you try to get towards that ideal, then all the other things that we talked about apply, right? And then you can actually use your suppliers the best way that you can get the most value out of them, because they are part of your organization.
I think I've done this from both sides. So been an internal PM and we've used an external consultancy to do some work for us. And I think at that point, you need to make sure that you're giving them all the information. So kind of join together, how do you embed them as if they are a new starter in your organisation? What do they need to know? How do you keep that communication and keep that transparency? And then it's the same on the opposite side now. So with an organisation, if they're giving me the information, how do I make sure that I understand everything I need to know? How do you just keep that communication throughout? I think for me, it's transparency and communication, whether it's internal departments that don't really work together or a third-party supplier and a internal business.
Yeah, I guess on the whole, GDS is in the lucky position of mostly doing most of its work in-house and having in-house teams. So I haven't really been in a circumstance where we've engaged a supplier to do a discovery work, but I know it does happen in the public sector. And so I guess if I was in that position, yeah, I think I'd be echoing your thoughts of getting that richness of exchange, and ideally having some people who are along from the client organization who follow along with the supplier and are sort of participating in the discovery process and absorbing that information, but also keeping an eye on a firm regular conversation about the sort of situational awareness, those 4 risks kind of questions. Are we asking the right questions and trying to do that scrappily and cheaply? Yeah.
I think, sorry, no, I was just going to say that from a client's perspective as well, if you encounter a supplier that is saying, no, I don't care, just tell me what needs to be done, they don't care. And then you have to kind of also see if they are the right supplier.
I think when I had that with a client though, some of that was their understanding of what the discovery was. So I just have to accept that at the beginning, they felt like they didn't care, but I was going to take them on this journey and they were going to know at the end.
You're going to make
we
them
went
care.
through, I was going to make them care. We took them through and was like, okay, just trust me, let's do these activities. And it was like mapping things back through. So then by the time that we came to put that backlog in place, that it's like, okay, I now understand the purpose of everything. So yeah, people do care if they understand well enough.
I've actually worked with Codurance, worked with Dimitri on some squads, and I think I really like the model where you are working with an engineering third party and you embed them and they're involved in discovery right there with you, because you really maximize the value of that partnership. I'm more nervous, I see it work less well when you, and actually we were going to have a speaker tonight who was from a design agency, and I think we would have had a nice fight.
Is that why I didn't come?
Yeah, I'm messaging behind the scenes. When you outsource discovery to an agency, usually what I see happening is you get like this really nice, shiny, we get a really nice PowerPoint presentation. You're going to get some beautiful designs, a load of research that some people did, and then they will go away. I've never seen those things get built, ever. Because the reality of them, when you actually start to build it, you have no one actually within the organization that participated in all of the user interviews and heard the nuance of sitting through hours of kind of talking to customers. The realities of building that perfect thing, this is what your checkout flow needs to look like, when the engineers then get their hands on it, and they're like, this is stupid, that's going to take forever. So just try and, if you work with agencies, design agencies, try and embed them as well, just as you would if you're working with an engineering company like Codurance, so that you share that knowledge and you go do that discovery. Because I acknowledge that some companies don't have internal capabilities and you need to ramp up quickly. So just partner with them. So you have one of your product managers sitting in on the user interviews that the agency's running, and your designers co-designing as much as you can, so that when that agency does eventually go away, you're not just kind of left with your, the famous 90-slide McKinsey presentation.
Very good.
Mm-hmm. I'm a little bit conscious of time though, but for anyone that's asked questions that we aren't going to get to, we've probably got about 10 minutes left. We'll make sure that we go through these. I know there's a follow-up email coming out, but then we can follow back up on that for any common themes, just to make sure. But have you got any others that are shining out?
I've got,
Any common?
Some culture, more of a common culture piece about how to deal with conflicts
Mm-hmm.
between two different teams, and also how do you prevent a sense of fatigue that's kind of falling out.
Okay. So ask a question there about conflict, which you touched on briefly earlier about kind of strong personalities and different views. But I think for me anyway, conflict in teams, it's like, how do you have those conversations up front with people so that it doesn't get to the point of conflict? So talking about ways of working, are you creating a safe space within your teams that on retros people can say, do you know what, this has really been irritating me and this is why? And I think it's leading in a way by examples. It shouldn't get to that point where it's actually at conflict. It's, this happened, this is what the impact was, can we try and do it this way? Rather than letting things get built up, because people are people, but if you have conversations with them, it doesn't get to that point of annoyance. I think conflict's always a difficult one because people deal with it in very different ways. I don't know if anyone's got thoughts briefly.
Many thoughts, but
Yeah.
not very coherent. It's conflict can come because of many reasons, right? There is this kind of underlying thing. If the culture is kind of promoting conflict for many different reasons, that's one problem. But let's leave that for now and just to talk about. Often it's actually related to not understanding the goal well, not agreeing and aligning on the goal, or also especially when you have kind of individualisms within the team as well, it's related to not having the goal, where people are being assessed or judged by different kind of criteria, so that when they talk to each other, they have their own kind of goals and ideas in mind, and those are being threatened. So they have those fears as well and those kind of things. So I think when it comes to trying to resolve conflict, the first set of things is like, are we trying to achieve the same goal, but our approach is different? So like that's one of the first things to try to understand. Of course, there's all sorts of things around values and so on, but that's a culture aspect, and it's a kind of a very long discussion. But so try to kind of align on the goal, I guess. Try to see, do you have the same goal, and then having kind of this values like respect and so on to say, well, okay, we're gonna listen to each other and listen to each other's approaches, because if we have the same goal, which means that we're trying to achieve the same thing, so we don't really have a conflict at the most fundamental level. We just differ on the approach, and then that becomes a bit easier to understand. But if your goals are different, then it's not easy to resolve.
Was there any, the part about fatigue?
Yeah.
Is that product discovery fatigue, or is it, yeah? I think that's totally valid, especially if you're working for a company that's kind of pre-transformation, wanting to move to a product operating model. It's exhausting because you're constantly having to fight the good fight and advocate to be allowed to do work and operate in a certain way that you know is kind of best in practice, best in class for achieving amazing products. It is exhausting. Again, I think a lot falls on the product manager because you've got to be the, like, getting your team excited. Yeah, we're going to build this feature that someone has told us to build. So I would recommend trying to, I guess, work on your persuasion skills around persuading the senior leadership or whoever kind of controls how you get to operate, and trying to show them why it's the right way of doing things. And there's tons of different kind of tools out there that you can use to help advocate for operating in this way. And then that can, when you start to get the opportunity to be the empowered product team, so you're solving problems, not just building features, you just see these teams transform and they become really energized and excited. Like, I've seen companies just transform, and it's amazing to watch. And everybody, the caliber of how they operate drastically increases. I think that's the best way of fighting the fatigue. And if it gets too much, leave and go to a company that does it the way you want to do it, because there's a million tech companies out there.
Perfect. Are we on time? We're probably just about there on time, but I'll get this list off to us, then we'll go through it and see what we can address. I think just as a bit of a closer, I think we've covered quite a lot here, but if we wanted to give everyone like a bit of a tip or a key takeaway or something that you like to leave people with, do you want to, Mash, do you want to go first? I'll go the opposite way down the line.
All right, okay. So I think for me, the key takeaway is the kind of the whole team aspect, right? Doesn't matter where you come from, what role you're performing, you have to look at your team and say, well, am I operating in this whole team, or am I operating in a particular silo? And if you are operating, if you think that you're not operating in a whole team kind of mode, which basically means, do I understand the strategy and vision? Do I understand all aspects of, and have awareness and contributing to the discovery, contributing to the delivery of the product, and understand exactly what impact my work is having and the team's work is having, and we have the same goal. If you think that you're not there, then you have to start then thinking about what are the next things that I can do to help to kind of bring that closer. And that will improve your own personal life, your professional development, because being in silos and those kind of specialisms, they don't really help your career that much. The more you understand the holistic picture, the better your career is as well. So from a personal perspective, but also the better you are contributing to the organization. So the key takeaway from my perspective is try to understand and try where your team is, where you are, and what are the next things to do that you can improve, basically.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, and maybe just sort of following on from that in a way, and I'm going to say it again, the 4 risks model, I think, is a really helpful framework, and regardless of the role you're in, whether it's product or engineering or design, I think it's quite a useful unifying framework that you can, it resonates for every discipline, I think, and it's quite a useful framework for building that holistic picture. So check out that.
Okay. My tip would be don't underestimate what is at stake here. So unless you are working for a company that has 80% of its pot of money can just be thrown down the drain, because that's what we know, Harvard Business Review research. If you are not doing product discovery, you are probably building a load of crap. So I'm literally working with a company that just started working with them. They will probably go under because they've spent the last year building something that does not have product market fit, and they are just realizing that. And like there's not much I'll be able to do to help them. They have about a few months to try and iterate and find a market for their product. So that's what happens if you don't do product discovery, genuinely. That's how companies win and how they lose in the market. So don't underestimate it.
Yeah, and I think from me, it comes back to just keeping that alignment. Like, how do you get everyone on the same page? Because we all understand things in different ways. We all have different bits of information. How do you get everybody together? So I think you can't say things too often. Encourage people to say why. If you question other people throughout that discovery and throughout going, it just becomes healthy that everyone starts questioning it. I think that I've seen particularly, I love it on stand-ups when the team or on refinement, like, why are we doing this though, Rachel? I'm like, okay, I can explain that. We can go through. And I think getting everyone on the same page, I think that for me takes half your battle. And you don't have to write really long user stories. Perfect. We are going to still be around though. If anyone wants to come and grab any of us, please feel free to. There'll be a follow-up email coming out with our details on as well. And as I said, I'll get that list off Austin and we'll probably do a second follow-up with some of those answers on. And then just as a closing, I think, does anybody want to do any plugs for anything?
Yeah.
I think you're hiring, aren't you?
Yeah, GDS are hiring. There's not many job ads out at the moment, but there definitely will be product management and developer jobs. So please look at our website if you're interested in working in government. Yeah.
Sarah, anything?
If you want product coaching, or I do actually, Dimitri, I do product discovery masterclasses, which, sorry, I keep picking on you. Dimitri's sat through, and trainings on how to do product, all things product. So you can learn more at sarahtims.com, or you can just come and talk to me, get free advice.
Brilliant, thank you.